If you are 64 years old and getting ready to file for Social Security this year, you have probably run into a headline calling this the worst age to claim. The story goes that you are stepping into a kind of mathematical dead zone, where the jump in your monthly check between 64 and 65 is bigger than almost any other year in the whole system. That part is true. But it is not the number that should worry you most. For a married couple, the wrong claiming age is not just a matter of a few percentage points on one person's check. It can trigger a loss of more than $100,000 in lifetime survivor benefits, and most of the free calculators you find online never model that scenario at all. Standard advice tells couples to stagger their claims. The lower earner files early for some income now. The higher earner waits as long as possible to lock in a bigger check. It sounds smart on paper, but if the wrong spouse is the one who dies first, that same strategy can backfire, leaving the surviving spouse stuck with a permanently smaller check during the most expensive years of their life. So this is not really a video about whether 64 is a bad age to claim. It is about something bigger. We are going to walk through the survivor benefit trap that catches couples who followed reasonable advice, and then build what I call a no-panic bridge, a way to delay your own claim without watching your 401k shrink every time the market has a rough month. Let's start with why the age 64 panic is technically real, and why it is mostly a distraction from the number that actually matters. I've watched this play out with more families than I can count. Someone turns 64. The mortgage still is not paid off, and Social Security stops being an abstract number on a website and starts feeling like the only lever left to pull. Here is the real math behind the panic headlines. If your full retirement age is 67, claiming at 64 permanently cuts your monthly check by 20%. Wait one more year to 65, and that cut drops to roughly 13.3%. That single year of patience buys you a jump of about 6.67 percentage points, and it is a bigger single-year gain than you get moving from 62 to 63, or from 63 to 64. That 1 year between 64 and 65 cost you more than any other single year in the run up to your full retirement age. Why does that particular year hit so much harder? It comes down to how the Social Security Administration actually builds the reduction. For the 36 months right before your full retirement age, your check drops by 0.05% for every month you claim early. Age 64 sits right at the edge of that 36-month window. Claim earlier than that, at 62 or 63, and part of your reduction gets calculated at a gentler rate instead. Claim at 64 or later, and you are fully inside the steeper zone for the rest of the way. That is the mechanical reason the jump from 64 to 65 feels so much bigger than the years around it. You are not imagining it, and it is not random. Push all the way back to age 62, and the cut is 30% for someone with a full retirement age of 67. That 30% is not a one-time hit. It follows you for as long as you live, and it compounds every year Social Security applies its annual cost of living adjustment. The 2026 adjustment came in at 2.8%. That sounds small until you remember it is 2.8% of a permanently smaller number, applied year after year for the rest of your life. None of this means claiming at 64 is automatically a mistake. If you need that income to cover a mortgage, a car payment, or medical costs that will not wait, taking the smaller check early is not you carelessly leaving money on the table. It is a trade, time now for a smaller check later, and for a lot of people's real lives, it is a completely reasonable trade to make. The invisible cost is simply that the trade is permanent. There is no version of this where you claim early now and quietly switch to the bigger number once things settle down. But even if you sidestep the age 64 trap completely and hold out, there is a second trap waiting at 67, and it has nothing to do with the SSA's formula. It has everything to do with what happens to your own behavior the first time your investment account drops. Here is the part nobody warns you about before you decide to delay Social Security. The math almost always says wait. Delaying from 62 to 70 can grow your check by well over 50%. But knowing that and living through it are two different things. Picture this. You retire at 62. Your Social Security is sitting there, growing every month you do not touch it. But your only income now comes from your own savings. Every month, $3,000 comes out of your investment account instead of your Social Security check. If the market has a normal year, that feels fine. If the market drops 20% in the same stretch, most people panic, call it quits, and file for Social Security years earlier than they planned, not because the math changed, but because their nerves did. That is not a failure of willpower. It is a completely predictable reaction, and it is exactly why a plan built only around a spreadsheet keeps falling apart in real life. The fix is to stop treating your investments and your Social Security decision as one pool of money. Instead, build what I think of as a Social Security bucket, a separate, boring stash of cash set aside for one job only, covering the years between when you stop working and when you actually file. Here is the mini-math. Say your projected benefit at your full retirement age is $3,000 a month. If you plan to retire at 62 and hold off filing until 67, that is 5 years, or 60 months, you are trying to bridge. 60 months at $3,000 a month comes out to $180,000. That is your bucket number. It has nothing to do with your total portfolio and everything to do with covering those specific years without touching your long-term investments or your Social Security decision at all. That bucket does not belong in the stock market. It belongs in cash, certificates of deposit, or short-term treasury bonds, something that will still be worth $180,000 the day you need it, regardless of what the S&P 500 did that year. The point of the bucket is not growth. Its only job is to sit there, boring and predictable, so the rest of your money never has to be sold at the wrong moment. I used to think the answer was simple, that everyone should just look at the spreadsheet and wait as long as possible. I've changed my mind on that. A spreadsheet does not help you sleep when your account balance is dropping every month, and you are technically spending your retirement savings just to hold out for a bigger government check later. The bucket is what makes waiting emotionally survivable, not just mathematically correct. If any of this sounds like your situation, the actionable step is straightforward. While you are still working, calculate your own gap number, the number of months between your planned retirement and your planned filing date, multiplied by your expected monthly benefit. Then start moving that amount into something stable, a high-yield savings account, or short-term treasuries, so it is sitting there, untouched when you need it. Having that bridge in place solves the panic selling problem, but it does not solve a second, quieter problem that shows up specifically for married couples, one that has nothing to do with market timing and everything to do with who claims first and who is left behind. Most advice about staggering Social Security claims stops at the individual level. The lower earner claims first, the higher earner waits, and on average, the household comes out ahead. What that advice quietly leaves out is what happens to the survivor benefit if the wrong spouse is the one who dies first. And that gap is exactly where couples lose real money. Here is the mechanism behind it. When one spouse dies, the survivor does not keep both checks. They keep whichever is larger, their own benefit or their late spouse's, and that inherited benefit locks in based on the age their spouse was when that spouse claimed. If the higher earner delays all the way to 70, they lock in 124% of their full benefit, and that 124% is what the survivor carries for the rest of their own life. If the higher earner claims early instead, that smaller permanently reduced number is what gets passed on too. Let's put real numbers on it. Say John and Mary are both 64. John is the higher earner with a full retirement age, benefit of $3,500 a month. Mary is the lower earner with a full retirement age benefit of $1,500 a month. Following the standard staggering advice, Mary claims at 62 to bring in some income sooner, while John, as the higher earner, is the one who is supposed to hold out. Now picture John passing away at 75. If John had actually waited and claimed at 70, Mary would drop her own $1,500 check and step up to John's much larger survivor benefit for the rest of her life. But if John, feeling the same pull toward money, now that a lot of people feel at 62, had claimed early instead of waiting, Mary's survivor check ends up permanently reduced by more than $800 a month compared to the version where John held out. Stretch that $800 gap across 20 years of widowhood, and you are looking at a loss of roughly $192,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a house. This is not about being morbid, and it is not about planning around anyone's death. It is about recognizing that Social Security, for a married couple, doubles as the best life insurance policy either of you will ever own, and the premium for that policy is simply patience from whichever spouse earns more. It is worth asking yourselves plainly, right now, while you are both healthy, and this is just a planning conversation instead of an emergency, who is more likely to be the one left managing a household alone? That is not a comfortable question, but it is a far cheaper one to sit with now than to discover the answer by accident later. So the standard staggering advice is not wrong exactly. It is just incomplete. It optimizes for the household's income while both people are alive, and it quietly skips over the version of the future where one of you is doing this alone, which raises an uncomfortable question. What if the whole system changes before either of you gets anywhere near 70? Let's stress test that. Here is a fair question if you are thinking about delaying your claim for 6 more years. What if the system runs out of money before you even get there? The Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted somewhere around 2033 to 2034. That does not mean checks stop. It means that if Congress does nothing at all between now and then, incoming payroll taxes alone would only cover a portion of scheduled benefits, projected to be a cut of somewhere between 20% and 25% across the board. Let's stress test the delay strategy against that worst case. Say your full benefit at 67 would be $2,000 a month. Claim at 62, and you are locked into a 30% cut, dropping you to $1,400. Delay instead to 70, and delayed credits push that same benefit up to $2,480 before any trust fund cut is applied. Now apply a 25% across the board, cut to both numbers. The early claimer drops to $1,050. The person who delayed drops to $1,860. Even in the worst realistic scenario Congress has projected, waiting still leaves you with a meaningfully bigger check because the 8% a year in delayed credits was applied to a higher base to begin with. It also helps to look at what has actually been happening to the program, not just what might happen to it. The maximum amount of earnings subject to Social Security tax rose to $184,500 in 2026, which means more high earners are paying into the system than in past years, not fewer. And in January 2025, Congress fully repealed the windfall, elimination provision, and the government pension offset, rules that had reduced or eliminated benefits for millions of teachers, police officers, and other public workers for decades. That is not the behavior of a system quietly being dismantled. It is a program still being adjusted, and in some ways expanded. None of that guarantees nothing will ever change. But it does mean the fear that the program might not be there should not, on its own, be the reason you claim early if the math otherwise favors waiting. If the math holds up even under a worst-case cut, and you still feel the pull to claim at 62 anyway, that pull is not really about the numbers. It is a psychological barrier, and it deserves to be taken seriously on its own terms. There is a well-documented bias behind why so many people claim at 62 even when the math says wait. It is called loss aversion, and in this context it shows up as a kind of bird in the hand thinking. A dollar you can hold today feels more real than $2 promised for some point in the future, especially when a part of you is quietly worried you will not be around long enough to collect it. If that is how you feel, there is nothing wrong with you. It is completely normal to feel like you are losing something by not claiming at 62. You paid into this system for close to 40 years. Of course, part of you wants that money back the moment the door opens. Here is a small shift in framing that helps. Instead of thinking of delayed filing as waiting on the government, think of it as buying an inflation-protected annuity, one that increases your income by roughly 8% for every year you hold off between your full retirement age and 70. No private insurance company sells that exact product, and if one did, it would cost far more than what delaying Social Security effectively costs you. That reframe will not erase the pull to claim early. It just gives you a second way to look at the same decision, one that has less to do with fear and more to do with what you are actually building. If you are the kind of Gen Xer who is tired of being handed the same generic advice everyone else gets, and you want a plan that actually accounts for your health, your family, and your real numbers instead of a one-size-fits-all spreadsheet, go ahead and subscribe to Wes Investor. This channel is built around real people's situations, not a hypothetical average retiree who does not exist. Let's turn this into 3 things you can actually do. Step 1. Calculate your survivor gap. Look at both spouses' full retirement age benefits and figure out the dollar difference between them. If one of you is younger, healthier, or simply likely to outlive the other, the higher earner should be the one leaning toward delaying, even if that means the lower earner claims first to bring in income sooner. Step 2. Use the tax break that is already on the table. Under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, anyone 65 or older gets an extra $6,000 deduction on top of the standard deduction for tax years 2025 through 2028. If you are married and both 65 or older, that is $12,000 combined. That deduction phases out above $75,000 in income for a single filer, or $150,000 for a married couple filing jointly. So check where you land. For most people below those levels, the tax savings from that deduction is real money you can redirect straight into the bridge bucket we talked about earlier. Step 3. Watch your Medicare Part B premium while you are funding that bridge. The standard Part B premium in 2026 is $202.90 a month. But if you pull too much out of a traditional IRA in a single year to cover your bridge years, you can push your income high enough to trigger IRMAA, an income-related surcharge that can push that same premium up to $689.90 a month, depending on how far over the threshold you land. A bridge bucket built from cash and after-tax savings avoids that problem entirely. One built by yanking large IRA withdrawals can quietly cost you thousands in higher Medicare premiums instead. There is one more wrinkle worth knowing. For a specific group of people, claiming at 64 is not actually a mistake at all. It might be the smartest move on the board. So where does that leave the age 64 panic we started with? It is real, but it is not the biggest number in the room. The bigger number is the $100,000 or more that a couple can lose when the survivor benefit trap goes unaddressed, and the good news is that trap is entirely avoidable once you know it exists. We have walked through why the jump from 64 to 65 hits harder than people expect. How to build a bridge bucket so delaying does not mean watching your savings bleed out in a bad market, and why the higher earners claiming age is really a decision about protecting whoever is left behind. Retirement was never meant to be a math contest. It is about having options. Whether you end up claiming at 62, 67, or 70, the real goal is making sure that decision comes from a plan, not from fear. If this helped you see the decision differently, subscribing keeps you in the loop for the next one. And I would like to know where you land. Are you building a bridge to wait it out, or are you taking the money and running? Tell me in the comments.